Hello everybody, and welcome to the FitBigStrong podcast. This podcast was created to provide free, high-quality health and fitness information for everybody to become the best versions of themselves. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Let's get on to today's topic, which is you're not training hard enough. Most people, they just don't train to the extent that they should be. And we're going to kind of be breaking that down today, kind of my thoughts on the situation, etc. So, there was a study done, and what they did is they got beginners. They said, okay, do this set and go to failure, what they thought was failure. And they wrote down their number. Then they got the same participants the next set to be like, hey, do it again. But this time, we're going to give so much verbal encouragement. We're going to be like, go, 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 like more reps kind of scenario. And what conspired out of that was that some of the participants would get an extra 3 to 5 reps. Some of them even got as much as 10 reps. And so what this demonstrates is that a lot of people, they think they train to a certain degree, but they don't actually push themselves to a point where that they're actually training to 2 reps in reserve, 3 reps in reserve. And just to clarify what I mean by reps in reserve, so if you were to do a set and the last rep, you go for another one and you just don't get it, the rep beforehand, the one you didn't fail, is 0 reps in reserve, meaning you had 0 reps left in the tank. So if I say 3 reps in reserve, that means I had 3 more good reps, just to clarify that. And so why is this even a problem? What's wrong with beginners miscalculating or misrepresenting what their sets were? Well, there's a minimum intensity threshold for training. There's a minimum amount of, what's described as proximity to failure. So how close to failure or how close to 0 reps in reserve are you training? And the minimum amount, once you kind of pass that beginner stage, is 3 to 4 reps in reserve. If you're not training 3 to 4 reps in reserve, you're probably not reliably stimulating any results. And, well, we want to stimulate results, right? And so, and as you become more advanced, you know, that 4 reps in reserve, that kind of starts to dip away. You know, in strength training, there's lots of applications for lower RPE kind of training, for like technique work, recovery sessions. But when it comes to building muscle, you really need to be making sure you're training hard enough. And so how does one figure out that they're training hard enough? Well, I think one way, which is really good, and I think this is a general proxy, is that when do the reps start to slow down? If every rep looks the exact same, then are you challenging the systems? Because think about this. As training gets more difficult, as the set progresses, it's expected that the level of difficulty will increase. And so therefore, the speed of the reps will decrease as well. It kind of corresponds. And so, well, once the reps really start to slow down, in my experience, you've likely hit 3 reps in reserve. And there's also a way to calibrate reps in reserve, because each exercise kind of has a different rep cadence or rep speed relative to the actual proximity to failure. So let me explain this. If I'm doing a bicep curl, right, I crank out like 15 reps. You know, that 3rd rep, that 3 reps in reserve will be like, super grindy. And then I'll go for another super grindy rep, and then another super grindy rep. And so the speed is really slow despite me having more and more reps. But we look at something like a lat pull down. It's like, I know that I'm approaching a high degree of proximity to failure when it starts to become hard to touch my chest. Like, I've really got to focus on squeezing my back so it touches my chest. And so each rep, each exercise, not each rep, each exercise kind of has its own cadence, which correlates with reps in reserve. So how do you calibrate this? Well, on your last set for your exercise, go to failure. Just do as many as you can with the same form and take a mental note of what the reps felt like. So for example, if you were only able to do 15 reps, number 15 was what 0 reps in reserve looks like. Number 14 was what 2 reps. Number 13 was what 3 reps feels like and looks like. And so what you do is you take a mental note of what that felt like. And then as you approach your other sets, for example, if you're prescribed a 3 reps in reserve set, right, which is good. And you remember, okay, so it starts to feel like this, and the speed of the rep starts to form like this as well. Once that rep approaches, boom, like you've created you've taken a calibrated measurement of what it feels like, and now you've applied that to your training. And what if you're wrong? Just hypothetically, let's say you're wrong. Well, next week, as the intensity increases to progress, you just go to that intensity, and then maybe last week on the block, like maybe you've got 0 reps in reserve, and you perform a 0 reps in reserve set, and then maybe you were wrong. Maybe like you were actually really off, but it doesn't matter because now you've just recalibrated it anyway. And so the more practice you get with trying to understand how hard you're training, the better you get at it. And that skill becomes more and more and more important as you advance in your training. So, as I said, like just keep a mental note and use that calibration method to understand where you are in training. And so now you know how hard you need to train. It's important to understand the quality over quantity. I see a lot of people in the gym, they're doing like 20 sets, 30 sets, and they're not approaching failure whatsoever. Or not, like they're way below the threshold. They're like 5 reps in reserve, 6 reps in reserve. And they're like, yeah, brother, I'm just, I can't figure out how to grow. And it's just like, once they fix their intensity issue, like the number of sets drops, and they get better workouts. And so I think that's really interesting. And on the next podcast, we're going to break down the very specific details in regards to why that is. Mechanistically, why does less sets equal more growth? So with the podcast, I'm going to be trialing a different style of content. I want to create more content which is short, really sweet and concise, and as opposed to those kind of long, drawn-out podcast episodes, which are really cool, but I think this will be a way that I can provide more value and answer questions in a more simplified manner. Thank you for listening to this episode of the FitBigStrong podcast. If you enjoyed this episode or gained some value from it, then your support is greatly appreciated. The more positive ratings, likes, and comments we receive, the more this podcast gets promoted organically. We look forward to you tuning in for more episodes.